Welcome to the Power and Community Podcast brought to you by Art of Me. I'm your host, Shonda. Remember, Art of Me is a nonprofit organization that works with young people to share their stories and perspective through writing, art, and film. Right now, we are doing an episode where we collaborate with people that belong to the HIV and AIDS community. Guys know from our last couple of episodes, we've been focusing on the basic understanding of HIV and AIDS, the people that make up that community, sexual health prevention, all of those things. But we want to have a real conversation. So we brought a real person, somebody who's like, not that those other people weren't real, but we brought somebody who is going to give us the real, has been involved in this community for years. It's a part of their life. It's who they are. And then just other things that has made them who they are today. So today we have a very, very, very special guest by the name of Bryan Jones. Welcome to the podcast, Bryan.
Hey, how you doing? Bryan C. Jones, because there are a lot of Bryan Joneses, but not a Bryan C. Jones.
Bryan C. Jones, excuse me, everybody. Let it be known it is a C. Okay, I love that. It's all about identity and making sure people know who you are. I love that. Bryan is an amazing individual, but I'm going to let him tell you more about himself. I actually read an article on you, Bryan, and the article's angle was like, you cannot box Bryan into labels or all of the things that he's done. He's done so many things that you can't say he's just an activist or he's just a community organizer or he's just these things. You are like so many things. And the article was long. I was like scrolling down, looking, I was like, wow, he has done a lot of things. So to start you have, honestly, you have. So to start the podcast off, can you tell us who Bryan C. Jones is? Where did you grow up? And how long have you been speaking in various communities that you have been speaking in?
Okay, my name is Bryan C. Jones. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, mainly the Huff area. Grew up and went to Addison Junior High during the Huff riots, and then I moved over to Superior. But I've always lived deep in the hood, if there is such a definition. I am 60 years old. I'll be 61 this year. I have been thriving with AIDS, going into my 38th year. And I've been advocating probably half that time, maybe going into my 20th year of advocating and doing activism. I'm in several spaces, both nationally and internationally. I've spoken nationally on several issues. I'm also a part of the founding steering committee of a global movement called U equals U. And that stands for undetectable equals untransmittable. And what it essentially means that if a person living with HIV who is on effective treatment and has a suppressed virus, that they cannot transmit HIV to their sexual partners. This is groundbreaking. And this is information that our community needs to know about. So besides that space, I'm also responsible, I guess depending on who you talk to, but most people say for mobilizing Ohio around trying to change our HIV criminalization laws, because people living with HIV in Ohio as well as around the country are still being prosecuted under these draconian laws. These laws are outdated. They don't match the science. They don't help protect the public. So that's another space I'm in. And I do something called dirt advocacy, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And so many spaces. And then because HIV, I think it's important that we focus on as we move through this talk, that Audre Lorde says there are no single issue fights because people don't live single issue lives. We've got to understand that HIV is not a single issue fight. It's not a single issue. HIV lives in the intersections. The stigma of HIV exists in the systemic and structural disparities. So we need to start looking at the intersections of how HIV and AIDS can be changed. The narrative can be changed in our community.
What did I tell y'all? We already on the road. We ain't even got 5 minutes into this podcast and Bryan is already giving it to us. Okay. I love it. I'm already informed and we haven't even dug deeper into what you're talking about. I wanted to talk to you about, you said it on the podcast here, and then in our email exchange, you've already said it. You said, I've been thriving with AIDS for 38 years. Some misinformed people who hold on to HIV stigma might say that's an odd sentence or an odd way to put it. What would you have to say about them saying that that's odd?
I think a lot of people, and depending on, and even educated people, feel like that I shouldn't use the words AIDS because AIDS is a progressive condition of HIV. HIV is a virus, and AIDS is what HIV can progress to. But when I was diagnosed in the early 80s, there was no HIV. It was just either GRID, which was gay-related immunodeficiency, or an AIDS diagnosis. So I continue, and once you have it clinically, once a person has an AIDS diagnosis, which means that their T cell or their immune system falls below a certain number, and or opportunistic infections like cancers, those kind of things, like many of y'all may know HIV with the movie Philadelphia. We had the little red spots. That's a skin cancer. So that's an opportunistic infection, and that progresses you to an AIDS diagnosis. But clinically, once you get an AIDS diagnosis, you always have an AIDS diagnosis. That's not to say that your immune system can't rebound to where you're healthy, but you still have an AIDS diagnosis. Personally, I always say thriving with AIDS, or I'm a person living with HIV with an AIDS diagnosis, to pay homage to those people who didn't make it to the point of antiretroviral medication, to my friends that I lost way before HIV became manageable. So I pay homage to all those people who went before me who didn't make it. And it also gives blessings and honor as to why I'm still here. So, and also it changes the narrative that just because we have HIV or AIDS, that you can't thrive. Thriving is not always a physical state of mind. And for many of us, where the mind goes, the body's going to follow. So I have always been thriving, even when I weighed 117 pounds and had stage 4 cancer. So
No, I love that. You know, as a person who's not a part of this community, but is starting to be more a part of it as I do this podcast and work with Stephanie, I'm always like, okay, how can I be an ally? You know, how can I work alongside a movement that's been going on way before I was even born? Even with you saying thriving with AIDS, it kind of takes that stigma off of it, because sometimes I'm nervous. Like, do I say, well, I know the difference between HIV and AIDS, but then I'm like, do I say it? Is it okay to say to a person who I know? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
it takes that off. I like how you take control of it when you
Mhm.
use thriving with AIDS. And I do, speaking of thriving and just living, and I think earlier we talked about intersectionality. We jumped into that right off the bat. I wanted to talk to you about your own personal intersectionality um when we think about life that you've gone on to live even after your diagnosis. So I know you do arts and theater as well. So I wanted to talk to you about what your experience about being an artist and traveling and performing. How, like, let's talk a little bit about what it is to be a creative for you before we dive into more of the movement conversation.
Well, I started dancing when I was about 10 years old. And me being a little black boy in the hood, that came with its own set of challenges anyway. Um, but then I went to college. I went to University of Cincinnati, and I took classes at the College Conservatory of Music. And from that point, I went to Florida A&M. I'm thinking that going to a HBCU, you know, because I was always had this consciousness. But I learned that I learned that at University of Cincinnati, we had more consciousness than they did at HBCU. And the reason being is that at the HBCU had a lot of people who were legacies, meaning their parents went to the school, and a lot of people came with a certain amount of privilege, Black privilege, if there is such a thing. They came into this university, whereas at a white university, it was a more, it captured more what the reality was, because we were a Black entity surrounded by and controlled by a large white body. So therefore, our work, to me, was definitely more meaningful, and we banded together for issues that mattered more so than I felt when I went to Florida A&M. But I went to Florida A&M, and I continued to do musical theater. I I went over to Florida State and got a certificate in dance. And so I went on and did theater around the country, musical theater, did a couple of New York shows, Broadway shows, traveled abroad. Then I got into choreography, choreographed for Atlantic Star, did their Asian tour, so many other spaces. As a creative mind and being in that space, musical theater, I did concert dance for several years, but I was also the musical theater singer, actor, dancer. And this was all, I was diagnosed my senior year of college at Florida A&M. And so this was before I embarked upon any type of major career, even though when I was 10, I went on the road and traveled around dancing with like the Memphis Sound. It was like a band and like a kind of like a Motown showcase, but it was the Memphis Sound. So I've been in that kind of space of moving around and being artistic for a while. But I was diagnosed my senior year of college. So I just thought that I would not make it to do anything. When my family came to graduation, I thought it would be the last time I would see them. But life has a way of changing. I went on to do theater, but it was always in the back of my mind, when am I going to get sick? When am I going to get sick? So
I think just listening to what you said when we were talking about thriving, I think it's amazing that you went on to do all of those things and to hold those spaces, even with having that fear kind of sitting, on you like, oh, when is this going to happen? But to even, I mean, it speaks a lot that you kept pushing. Like you
but
didn't
I need to add that even in this, and we know that the arts were affected quite a bit by HIV and AIDS. It was like people were dying all around me. Even I've even done shows with the opening, the first half of the show, one person was there, but by the second act, they had to be rushed to the hospital. But the show went on. I did a show once where it was an opening number. Somebody got sick. The show had to continue. We had to fill in for that person on the fly. So it was just like, it's one thing to know you have this diagnosis and can go into a space where you don't have to think about it. But even while you're twirling and singing, what happened to such a, he had to take him to the hospital. That's a side conversation you're having while dancing on stage with somebody. And you're like, okay, is this gonna be my reality? So.
Yeah, that even changes what I was about to say. Let me rewind because I didn't think about, it's not just you thinking about yourself, but you're seeing it happening to people around you who are just as passionate about singing, dancing, and the arts, and still having to, come to that point. I think, I don't know. I wouldn't know how to, deal with that. And I think it's amazing that you could kind of sit here and retell that story, because I do think that's intense. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about like your advocacy movement that you have been working on for years, DIRT. What does DIRT stand for, and why was this movement born? Why did you create this movement?
And I want to tag that last conversation with one thing.
Okay.
I haven't been living this long with it by doing everything right.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, at one time I did everything wrong, and I'm still here. I think DIRT stemmed from a number of areas that affected my life, but it more so stemmed from a social consciousness that Black folks, I see now the new tagline is people of color. Or they say Black folks and people of color. I prefer to use Black folks and people of color, but when you say people of color, in my hood, many people of color don't like Black folks. And it could be vice versa. So I think we got to understand that Black folks, as well as other demographics, Latinos, Pacific Islanders, Asians, all have different issues, specific issues. And a lot of them are based in culture. So I saw that the epidemiology or the data that's being handed down said that Black people are most at risk for contracting HIV and carry the brunt of the new diagnosis. It should be no surprise that we are, because we're most impacted by everything. The system is not designed to help us it is only designed to hinder us. So for us to be on the front lines of contracting HIV and AIDS, it shouldn't surprise anybody. So I often saw millions of dollars being dispersed and earmarked for Black communities, but it never reached the community. When you got out and actually on the ground in that community, you never saw these millions of dollars on the street. A lot of agencies that got this money would develop pamphlets and put it in the library at the top of the hill. But the pamphlets never reached the bottom of the hill where the people are actually living. So DIRT is an acronym for direct, inspiring, reachable, and teachable. It is conversations for Black folks that look like us, live like us, and talk like us. It's a conversation that's stripped away of all pretense, because you got to cultivate that dirt before anything can begin to grow. And our communities have been impacted in so many ways from so many other issues. Gentrification, redlining, all these other issues have impacted us, which has, we've lost the sense of community. And the misconception for people who do prevention and outreach are that Black people don't want this information. But Black people welcome this information. And you'll be surprised by going into that community how welcoming they are and how much they need it. So I decided, I first started doing this kind of outreach in Garden Valley, because Garden Valley Neighborhood House was a welcoming place, because Jan Ridgway was on the same page. She don't want you, I often remember her saying, don't give me money if you're gonna tell me what to do with it. If you're gonna give me money and let me do what we need to do for our community. You know, we don't need you to save us. We can save our damn selves. We don't need a handout, we need a hand up. So that was her philosophy. So that fit well into what I wanted to do with DIRT advocacy. And I realized that it's up to us to save us. The health departments were not saving us. The initiatives that they were developing weren't reaching us. So it's time for us to save us. So I guess that kind of gives you DIRT advocacy in a nutshell. And it's been taking place since 2013.
It's been coming on for a long while. I think you said so many nuggets about how culturally we all are different. We are, and the way that we obtain information, the way we use it is different, regardless of, I love this new way of us trying to help each other reach across cultural boundaries and lines and stuff. It's amazing. But when it comes to health, we still do have these things that are unique to our communities. And as Black people, there is a specific way we want to be talked to, a specific way we want to be looked at, specific conversations we want to have. And you even talked about how the system, man, this systematic thing, it's financial, it's health wise, it's mental wise, like it takes over so many spaces. And even when we're sick and we need help, Black people have to run into that wall. So the thing that I love about DIRT is that like you said, we're not looking for them to come down and help us. Just give us the money because we know what to do with it. We know how to set it up. We know how to talk to our people and build lasting resources. So that's something that Art of Me is very passionate about, because we don't want to come in and save a community by creating film and media. We want to give that community the tools so that they can do it for themselves, so that they can do what needs to be done. So DIRT definitely aligns with that ideology. I mean, I don't know. I think that's amazing. I just love that part. We don't need you to save us. We don't. And that narrative is so tired. It's so over. Like, Black people are doing it. If you open your eyes and you look, we are trying to change our communities, and you don't, the system don't really want to help us anyway, but that's a whole other conversation.
Right. And you mentioned, even with the DIRT advocacy movement, we don't do grassroots advocacy because they get money. DIRT does wonderful, effective programs with no money, and it doesn't take a lot of people. One person can make a difference in your community. Speak up, speak out. And I use Audre Lorde a lot. She says, your silence won't protect you, mine won't protect me, so it's better to speak. And also, the DIRT advocacy movement, the other portion is we hold health departments and those who receive funding accountable. Nobody's holding them accountable. And another thing is, a lot of agencies think that by hiring a lot of Black people, that they're being pro-Black or something like that. You're just hiring a lot of Black people because the structure in which you're bringing them into still has a a systematic, it's either misogynistic or the system is not geared towards being open to other people. So if you're not looking at your institution or your organization through a racial equity lens, which is a whole nother conversation of how you've got to level the playing field and looking at the implicit biases that exist among your staff. And that doesn't mean that implicit biases can't exist among Black people. Because a lot of times you feel like, oh, send Sandra to talk to them. She's Black. Skin don't make us kin. Just because you look Black don't mean you're talking from a Black perspective. And a lot of times, unfortunately, many of us get lost in trying to assimilate or feel that by us having a certain degree of education, that we talk at people and not with people and to people. And that becomes that's even more of an issue. If we think about what Carter G. Woodson says in Miseducation of the Negro in 1930-31, and I'm probably paraphrasing, he said that if a Black person only teaches that which he was taught by the white person, it's as if the white man has taught him. So we got to, I can't hear you. I don't know what happened to your mic, but.
Oh, no, I'm just staying on mute so my sound doesn't interfere with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to add that, and that probably took some questions from you, but I added a lot though, didn't I?
No, but you made some key points that just because I don't know why people think we're monolith as Black people, that we just all do the same thing. We all, that's not true. We all have different interests, different upbringings. Like you said, those different college experiences that you had. You had a group of Black people who came from this lineage and, the bourgeoisie part of the
Right.
part of our people. And then you had these people who were in the thick of it, like, hey, we going through this predominantly white institution and we got to make change for our people here. So there are these different spaces and we are so different as a people. It's not right to send one person to speak the language for all of us, or I think it's crazy to me that we have to even reach up high for all of this money and stuff. Like, why do you guys get to hold the money and then we have to ask you? And I get holding them accountable. I'm so here for that. But I'm like, why do we need something for us where we're up there? You know what I'm saying? So we don't have to ask and we can just, I know it's easier said than done, but that's like me looking to the future of like, well, we don't have to bang on their doors because we have that stuff for our community too. But that's systematically a whole thing we have to break down to even walk into that space. Speaking of spaces and making spaces and conversations for Black people, talk to us about why that's important for us as a people to have spaces where we can talk about HIV, AIDS, education, sexual health. I mean, outside of the obvious reasons why it's important, but maybe like the more emotional and mental portion of it.
I think being honest, we as a Black people have to get our shit together. We have so much, and I am so proud to be Black, and we've got so much, but we just can't get on the same page with each other. So we've got to deal with, but that is to say, we have overcome so much being here in America that a lot of us forget how to love ourselves. We don't know how to love ourselves because we have overcome so much loving the master, loving the master's children, loving his work, loving all this other stuff that had nothing to do with us. So we're trying to get back to who we are as a people. And there's several things that hinder that. That's a systemic disparities and structural disparities that keep us lost and keep us separated. For me, integration was the worst thing that happened for us because it made it seem like, oh, everything is great and everything is fine. And to be more magnified, when Obama won, it's like, oh, racism doesn't exist in America. Look, a Black man became president. If we were supposedly free, then why do we have to fight for civil rights? And even now, when you hear about civil rights, you don't think about Black people, you think about LGBTQ people, because they've taken that from us. So they're constantly taking parts of our history. And me being a member of the LGBTQ community, I'm Black, same gender loving, and Orthodox Muslim. So I have a lot of isms. When I walk through the door, they're like, ooh, they don't know which one to address first. The xenophobia of being Muslim or the xenophobia. And most people, when I tell them I'm Muslim, they immediately think Nation of Islam. But I'm Orthodox or traditional Islam. So many things come into play as we try to move through. So it's important for us to have our own conversations. And as you can see, when we say Black Lives Matter, they say all lives matter. And we're not saying that white people's lives weren't hard. What we're saying is your race didn't make your life harder. Let us understand. And a lot of times they get offended when we want to have conversations just for us. And if we do invite white people into our space, we don't need you to come in and try to save us. We don't need you to come in and even talk. Just listen. That's all we need you here to do is listen. And so to make a long story short, I think we've got to educate our own about what our real situation is. And if we can develop, like a better phrasing, economic freedom, we're the only people that spend $200, $300 on a pair of tennis shoes. If we can hold off on buying, if you can just buy one tennis shoe, save $150. Do you know how much money, if we just stopped on one holiday for buying, or just stopped at one of those lines where they line up to buy Michael Jordan tennis shoes? Okay, they got a Black man on, but Michael Jordan is making money off that, but is Michael Jordan really a part of our experience? We got to ask ourselves. A lot of times you see Black folks on the front of things, but they a lot of white folks is making money off them. So I don't know if I got way off track.
I think it speaks to the sectionality of being Black. You can't talk about one thing with us without talking about those other things, like you just said. Practicing Islam, being same gender loving, being Black. I mean, these are all things that are one in you, but have so many separate conversations that have to be had about it. It's so particular. And I think that also points back to what I think you kind of said in the beginning about the stigma about HIV and AIDS, is that these people they have particular details about them that should not be rooted in this one diagnosis or rooted in this one thing. They are so intersectional. So I think I get what you're saying. You like, did I go off overboard? But yeah, you can't talk about Black people without talking about our financial issues in our community, and why I also agree with you about Michael Jordan not being a part of our community. That's the argument that I make with a lot of Black people. A lot Black celebrities don't live our experience. So I love when they do speak up and stuff like that, but they've taken the poverty conversation out of it, which kind of,
I think LeBron is probably the closest one to me that's sticking to it. And it seems to me he's gonna hold on there because he seems strong in terms of where he came from. But all it takes is $1 billion endorsement contract that may take him somewhere else.
That's
or
true.
He may become a target. I mean, we could talk about the whole Bill Cosby thing, but the issue at hand was bigger than Bill Cosby himself. And if we don't look past that and see, it came about when Bill wanted to buy, this was the second time trying to buy a network. So we've got to understand, and I'm not saying that, sexual abuse and all those things is wrong. I'm just saying, don't fall for the overplay for the underplay.
No, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Like it was 100% fine when he was making money for a network and being an actor, which sexual abuse is not okay at all. But I'm just saying, for the people who came and rained the hammer down on him, it was fine before. But when he goes to do something outside of what he should do as a Black man, what somebody else feel he should be doing, then we want to rain the hammer. And it's like, no, y'all should have been raining the hammer down on my man before.
But see, that just goes to show you that they have these dossiers. They hold on to stuff and build up files on people. I wouldn't be surprised, as little as I am on the totem pole, I speak out in some heavy places. I wouldn't be surprised if they just got some little Post-its stuck somewhere with my name on it. I don't have enough for a file yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not a Post-it or two.
No, I get that. Anybody who's building a pillar to hold us up and push us up, I agree. It probably is some Post-it notes and some journals going around. So Moving the conversation along, I did want to ask you, because I'm a person who, like I said, is stepping into this community, and not even intentionally, to be honest with you, Bryan. I just been working with Art of Me, and now we've collaborated on this HIV and AIDS project, and now I'm learning so much, and now I am an ally, and I want to continue to be one. What do you feel like it means to be an ally for the HIV and AIDS community? What does that look like for those of us who aren't yet a part of the community but want to get involved?
Well, I always say, I'm gonna preface it with this: everybody should be HIV positive. And I know you're probably saying, I don't know about, not from a blood test, but from a diagnosis. Positive about helping us eradicate this fight, positive about making the environment safe for people who want to get tested, positive about educating our people. And if one of us has it, we all have it. And we've got to understand, a lot of times we want to blame the lack of testing, everything on stigma. Stigma exists in everything. Too black, too dark, too light, too tall, too short. Stigma is everywhere. The real stigma exists in the systemic and structural disparities. So allies, being an ally, it's not really like you're an ally, because you're not an ally of being black, you're black. So you're not an ally. This is your fight because it's our people's fight. And specifically, HIV and AIDS is our people fight, because the narrative that has been handed down to us since the beginning of this pandemic. I always, when I talk, I seem like I'm a history teacher, because I think it's important for us to do what I call a Sankofa moment. Sankofa means to go back, to look back. Modern terms, you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it if you don't look back. But it's taken from Ugandan proverb that says it is not wrong or taboo to go back and fetch that which is at risk for being left behind. We're always at risk for being left behind, because we need to look back at the history of the battle of HIV and AIDS. When it was first came about in 1981, they talked about these 41 white gay men who had contracted this strange gay cancer. In that 12-month period from 81 to 82, 86 Black men had contracted the same gay cancer, but you didn't hear about them. So, which meant that Black people were safe, and they didn't start releasing numbers as it relates to Black people to 1983. So by that time, it was too late. So that has been the history of our health departments and organizations that claim to care about us. We know they don't care about us. So we've got to address medical mistrust in these spaces, and we all are leaders in our own little group. So I think we need to stop looking at people just because you don't have a diagnosis of HIV, that you're just an ally. You know, most of the allies, it really stands for I lie instead of ally. They get in and they lie about the narrative. And they say, well, we're doing this work and it's, you know, things are decreasing and that kind of thing. No, they're not. Especially after COVID-19, you're going to start to hear reports that diagnosis of HIV is decreasing. No, you just stopped testing because COVID-19 took over. And they're going to perpetuate that narrative because the epi data is going to show that. Whereas health departments rely on data, I rely on reality. And we've got to be real about this conversation. I don't care what your statistics are only as good as the people you reach. I can create statistics to be positive about anything I want. So those statistics don't mean nothing to me, but we know that's what they govern it on and how they mandate funding and that kind of thing. So you're not an ally. You just don't want to be an ally.
I got it. I 100% get what you're saying, because it's my people's problem. It's my problem. I think we have to have that perspective over a lot of things, including this. I also think it's very interesting that people twist the statistics to work toward. It's so sick, though. I don't know. It's so crazy because I feel like we want this to change. So why lie? You know what I mean? But again, go ahead.
I was going to say, just quote, the health department says that we are more at risk for contracting HIV because they want you to believe that we have more sexual partners than our white counterparts. Not true. Rapid drug use, not true. Black men are more likely to use a condom than their white counterparts. Give you an example. You hear when you go to the doctor that because you're Black, you're more at risk for high blood pressure and diabetes. If you go to villages in Africa, you don't see high blood pressure and diabetes. It's our diet that puts us more prone, not because you're Black. It's the diet, period. And you want to say it's because I'm Black. Okay, we know we like ham hocks, greens, grease, give me a bone with some grease. We know we like those things, but it's not because I'm Black. It's because of the diet that we have and the diet that has been given to us because there was a time we had no choice in what we were eating. And now even in the hoods and places that we see food deserts where fresh vegetables are not there and food insecurity. So they're still controlling our diet. And because the economy makes it easier, it's better for you to buy fast food than to try to feed a family with a few dollars. So, so with the health department, as it relates to HIV and AIDS, you hear that we have all these other risk factors when the real risk is in the system. It's the risk that puts us most at risk. Lack of housing, lack of education, lack of clothing. And last part is you hear that 1 in 2 young men between the age of 13 and 24, MSMs, men who have sex with men, will contract HIV in their lifetime if they don't change behaviors. That's a damn if I do, damn if I don't statement. Like 1 in 2, one of us is gonna have it. Instead of saying 1 in 2 young men do not have to settle for AIDS diagnosis because you can change behaviors. You're giving them the positive and pushing the positive. Also, you've got to stop calling them MSMs. Men who have sex with men used to denote a behavior. Now it's become the identity. And what you're doing is reducing everything of these young men you're trying to reach to just sex. I don't care if you have sex with somebody different every night or every day. It doesn't discount the fact that you may be searching for love. So it just goes into, we've got to taking charge of our own narrative and putting our positive narratives out there.
And that you're more than those sexual encounters. Like, why limit somebody down to those things just because you know that portion of them or that part of their life? But again, we've already talked about the intersectionality of everybody, including people who are a part of these communities. It's not fair to, like you said, put that negative before the positive just to kind of create that stigma. And I mean, you touched on so many things. When I tell you, we keep coming back to the point where you cannot talk about this without concerning Black people without talking about everything that we deal with. Food deserts. I mean, that's a whole issue. You'll find a McDonald's on the corner before you find a Aldi's or a Save-A-Lot. You have to drive
or even
far.
A garden, just a garden springing up. I remember when I was in elementary school, we used to have these things called the track gardens, where you, as young, you could get your own little plot. They have systematically taken these kind of initiatives out of the schools. So we as Black folks, and I've noticed in certain communities that they have abandoned and started with the empty lots, putting gardens and that kind of thing. But we need more of this. And we also need to support our governments, our mayor's office, city council, and all that.
Yeah, because then you have to start considering the political aspects of it, because then we have to think about school and funding. I mean, there's so many conversations that, like, it drives home your point. It's not about being an ally. This is your community's issue as a whole. You can't talk about one thing without talking about the other. Like, we have to get involved.
We got to build, we've got to stop going from an I to a we. If we don't stop that I don't care, to a we, but there's a lot of education that has to be done. And another thing that bothers me, and the reason why I do dirt advocacy, is I want to leave a person's self-respect and dignity intact. Because a lot of times when you go to these places and ask for these services, they strip you naked in front of everybody there, especially being a person living with, oh, you have HIV? And it's a room full of people. And the whole room's like, yeah. And the whole room gets quiet. Now you've asked me all this stuff about my personal life. And then you say, oh, we can't help you. So a lot of times we break a person down so that we don't have a sense of self-worth. And that's how these social services are. That's what they're designed to do. You go to the welfare office, that's why they have you waiting and take a number, and each time, it's like going, if you think about it, each time they call your numbers, like going up on the auction block. We're going up on the auction block. But out in the suburbs, where white folks are receiving food stamps, and we know that more of them will receive them than us, they don't have a long waiting line. But the chances of you driving your car through there without getting pulled over for whatever, it's so many other things are impacting us and our ability to move forward here.
I totally agree with you on that. So I do want to ask you, so I hate when we have amazing guests on and the time constraints.
You're bringing me back.
So many. Yeah, we're going to have you back on here. Definitely. I really want to get into that conversation about HIV decriminalization movement. How did you get involved with that, and how are these laws used against sex workers and transgendered individuals? Let's talk more about that movement as a whole.
Okay, I first got into it. I went to the United States Conference on HIV and AIDS in 2009. I heard an organization called the Center for HIV Law and Policy, which is an amazing organization. I heard someone have a conversation about it, a seminar about it. And I was sitting there like, wow, I have been diagnosed since the early 80s. And I kind of heard these laws, but I didn't think that people were really being prosecuted. So I came back to my state and I started having conversations, and nobody was talking about it. So that's when I started calling Center for HIV Law and Policy. They'll tell you I called them every week. They started me. I know when I called them, they'd be like, it's Bryan Jones. And just tell them I'm not here. I called them that much. But I kept pressing them. Then I kept having conversations with different advocates in different parts of the state. And so I finally got them till they came into Ohio. They gave us what we needed most, was education. And it was hard getting people living with HIV to be a part of this. And I understand people's reasoning, but I knew in order for us to convince lawmakers and the public at large that these laws were unjust, if we couldn't convince ourselves, then how could we convince other people? So I stayed at it. And just here recently, in maybe the last 2-3 years, we have an overarching organization, Equality Ohio, that gives us the infrastructure that we need. We have a bill drafted and we're ready to take it to the floor for a vote. We are at those stages, but these laws are unjust. Even though I talked to you about U equals U, that people living with HIV cannot transmit it, they're on medication to their sexual partners. We know the legal system says a person is innocent until proven guilty. When it comes to HIV and AIDS, you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent. These laws most of them are never about actual transmission of HIV. It's simply that you did not disclose to someone you have HIV. And we're seeing people prosecuted for things that pose no risk for contracting HIV: spitting, biting, masturbating in the same room with somebody, sticking a toy in somebody without disclosing your status. These are things that pose no risk for contracting HIV. So our laws also say that you can be prosecuted for loitering after receiving a positive diagnosis. So that could apply to sex workers. A lot of times, our transgender brothers and sisters are being targeted because a lot of times the police know their history. And I can honestly just be walking down the street, or I could be waving at a friend, but now you're getting me for loitering or attempting to participate in solicitation. Either you do or you don't. How can I attempt to participate? Hey, can I join in? I mean, that's a different thing. Or if you have too many condoms on your person, more than 2 condoms, it's grounds for stop and frisk, or grounds that you may be doing sex work. So we have all these things. And then we have to address mass incarceration is real. These HIV criminalization laws are just another tool in their belt to lock us up. We have got to start understanding that we are criminalizing people for doing something that everyone has a natural right to do, which is have a healthy sex life. So these laws need to change. The government on one hand says that HIV is now a chronic manageable condition. So they don't give you Social Security, or some people have a hard time getting health care. But when it comes to the courtroom, they say we handing down a death sentence. Which is it? Is it chronic or manageable, or is it a death sentence? You have the same government or the same structural entity saying two different things at two different ends of the spectrum. We're either going to prosecute HIV or treat HIV. We can't do both. No.
I love that. We either gonna prosecute it or we gonna deal with it. We can't do both. Like, you can't. I 100% agree with you, Bryan. And it doesn't almost seem, I think there are some prejudices and definitely some some stigmas going on there that is even causing, because even to just be up here counting people condoms in their purse and stuff like that. I mean, come on now. This is just too much, you know what I mean? So
and the thing that we think testing, or we're going to do testing here, we can't test our way out of this epidemic. Because first of all, the people who are going into communities doing testing, they park these trucks there and they sit in the truck. You can't expect people to just knock them, hey, I'm gonna get HIV. You got to get out into the community. You got to engage the community-based organization because they have the trust of the community already. People, we already have a mistrust, and a rightly so mistrust of medical systems and systems in general. And so if we don't start engaging the community-based organizations, we're just wasting a lot of money. All that money you give to these organizations to do testing, look how much more good it can do in that community. And then people want to get tested. The thing about dirt advocacy movement is we target food pantries because you got to feed people physically before you can feed them mentally. And you have a captive audience because HIV and AIDS is not first, second, third, may not even be fourth or fifth on most Black people's list of things that have to happen. I got kids, I need to feed them, clothe them, we need to have somewhere to stay. And there's so many issues. And there's so many things that we suppress as people. As someone who was molested from the age of 3 to about 10 by a relative, we're told to keep these issues silent. I speak up about all of it because it lifts it all off me. Because if you don't speak up, you perpetuate it, it becomes what they call psychodrama. You carry it over to the next generation. And so all these things we're suppressing, we can't never see a clear field because we got all this other stuff, isms that we haven't dealt with. And it's no shame in being a person living with HIV. Let's get that straight. And I'm not gonna let your shit be my shit. A lot of times we take on other people's stuff and it's not about them. It's all about that other person. That's your stuff. I realize that your stuff ain't got nothing to do with me. And I don't know if I'm using too much profanity, but lastly, I'll say, if you can't deal with my diagnosis, I say what I eat don't make you shit. So
yeah, like not even keeping space with people who want to, do all that, because it's like, I'm not letting it stop me. I'm out here trying to make a difference. Bryan, I have so many questions I want to ask you, but we're going to have to do a part 2, okay? Because I feel like we haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg. I have I sent you a list of questions. I haven't even gotten to touch them, but we are running out of time. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. You have given us a wealth of information. We are so honored to have you on the Art of Me.
Anytime. We can do a part 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever.
I love this.
If your audience has some specifics they want to ask, I would love to do one where we take questions, that may be already mailed in or however, but the specifics of the audience would be great. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're venturing into the Facebook Live space, so maybe we'll take you up on that offer. So we'll get back to that. Thank you, Bryan, for being on the podcast. You have been amazing.
And if anybody reaches out to you, feel free to provide some or contact me. You
can go ahead and did you have something that you wanted to drop to let people know where to contact you, an email or a website or anything?
If you have my email, you can put my email, do it to, because these things are childproof. You need an adult to do it. And so I don't have an adult around to type it in for me. So
Okay, that's fine. I definitely can provide that for you. Bryan definitely goes and speaks, like he said, on a national level and a local level. So if you are interested in doing that, I'll definitely have his email available for you guys to contact him so that you can go ahead and just get this wealth of information into your community or your neighborhood. Again, thank you, Bryan, and thank you to our listeners who have been tuning in. Hey, go ahead and visit our website at www.artofme.org and connect with us on our social Instagram, Facebook at artofme.org. And if you like this episode, please rate, review it, subscribe, and share it so the information can get out there to more communities. Hey, until next time, I'll see you on the next episode. See ya.